Folks, hi. Welcome everyone to Glenn Carey's devotion. We're about an hour after the George Floyd verdict has come out, Derek Chauvin verdict. So on one level, we're going to read a story from Acts that at first glance has nothing to do with what's going on in our culture. But the interesting things, of course, is that the book of Acts always has these odd, strange characters and unique situations. And we all find ourselves drained right now in a unique situation. So I hope you watch on, hear a little bit about the Ethiopian eunuch who was baptized, and then stay with us as we figure out. We haven't spent any time processing the verdict much yet, although we could, for Kristina and I could for hours and hours and hours, bat this back and forth. And as we do that, I want you all to know what we are trying to do here as pastors in this context is ask ourselves over and over again, what is the Christian lens by which we view all things? Ethics, sociology, theology. We're trying to get to the core. So you said this very well on Sunday, whatever your political ideology, whether it's conservative or liberal, we have to speak, because of the nature of our calling, the Christian voice in the midst of this. And then every person has to hear that Christian perspective and not just say, well, I disagree with that from a political standpoint. Here is Christian ethics. Now we all got the difficult task of applying that to our family lives, our personal lives, and verdicts like this. So, all that before I've even read the story.
Well said. That was good.
Good, thank you. Here's an interesting story. What the gospel text, or the Acts lesson from chapter 6, was an interesting story of the early church community and its growing diversity and the stoning of one man named Stephen, who becomes a follower of Jesus. There are groups that don't like it, and they take him out and stone him. Then we get introduced to Saul in chapter 8, who is persecuting the church. And then Philip, who preaches in a community of Samaria. But now this is an interesting story, part of Acts chapter 8. Chapter 9 is the story of the conversion of Saul to Paul. But just before that is this odd, interesting story of Philip, one of the deacons in the early church, and his encounter with an Ethiopian eunuch, which we'll talk about that after I read the story. Then an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Get up and go towards the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza." So he did. He got up and went. Now there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of the Candace, a queen of the Ethiopians, in charge of her entire treasury. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning home, seated in his chariot. He was reading the prophet Isaiah. Then the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over to this chariot and join it." So Philip ran up to it and heard him reading the prophet Isaiah. He asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And the eunuch replied, "Well, how can I unless somebody guides me?" And he invited Philip to get in, and they sit beside him, and he sits beside him. Now the passage of Scripture that was being read was this: like a shepherd, he was led to the slaughter, like a lamb silent before its shearers. So he does not open his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe this generation, his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth. Well, the eunuch asked Philip, "About whom, may I ask you, does the prophet say this to? About himself or about somebody else?" Then Philip began to speak. He started with the scriptures. He proclaimed to him the good news about Jesus. As he was going along the road, he came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, here is water. What is it to prevent me from being baptized?" And he commanded the chariot to stop, and both of them, Philip and the eunuch, went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. When they came out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more and went on his way rejoicing. Philip found himself in a whole different region. As he was passing through the region, he proclaimed the good news to all the people of the towns when he came to Caesarea. This is an odd story. So let me start here. Philip is kind of given these angelic orders to go to this place, and along comes this chariot. And in the back of the chariot is this Ethiopian eunuch. Let's tell you a little bit about what that means about this guy. He's very rich. He's in a chariot that somebody else is, and if you're riding in the back roads of this area, it's dangerous and uncertain, but there he is. He has gone to worship, and he has the book of Isaiah with him, which only a rich person could have, right? It's not like these books are floating around like they are in all of our churches, the Bible someplace. But so he's got this text, he's worshiping, he's reading it. And Philip goes and jogs up next to the chariot and says, "Hey, do you have any idea what you are reading? Do you understand it?" Which is kind of offensive to begin with, like, you know.
He thinks he's dumb or something. Like, you want me to explain this to you?
Yeah, you want me to explain? And the guy says, "Well, how can I know if somebody doesn't explain it to me?" And Philip, come on up in the chariot. So here's Philip, a deacon in the church, an Ethiopian eunuch, probably dressed in really nice clothes. Eunuch meaning that he has been physically altered by those who have hired him so he doesn't steal their money. And not only steal their money, he doesn't participate in sexual activities with servants and other people. When you make somebody a eunuch, you make them unable to be sexually active with servants and other people. So that's not an uncommon practice at this time, which by itself is meshugana, right? It's crazy making. So, but that was their practice. So now here's this guy who's been, altered and mistreated, but now he's wealthy, and there's a certain characterization of this guy. He's in a chariot, he's gone to worship, and he's curious about Isaiah, and he asks, "Well, is this about somebody else, or tell us who this is about?" Gives Philip a chance to preach about Jesus, right? So he tells him, nope, Isaiah is talking about the coming Messiah, which we understand now is Jesus the Christ. And the chariot keeps going by. So you can imagine he's preaching to him about Jesus. There's a lull in the conversation. And then they pass by water. And the eunuch says, "Hey, there's some water over there. What prevents me from being baptized now?" Philip says, "Oh, nothing." So he takes him down there, baptizes him. He gets back in the chariot, and then Philip disappears to a whole other town far away, like a Star Trek kind of a thing.
That's what I was thinking.
I know!
It's like, beam me up, Spirit.
Beam me up and put me, which is the same thing in Luke's gospel where Jesus is on the road, they identify him, and suddenly he disappears. Philip the deacon disappears, and now this eunuch has new joy in his life because he's now a part, his faith has made sense, and he's part of a new faith community about joy and life in the Spirit. So what do we make from this? First of all, I explained to you as best as I could about the Ethiopian eunuch because, you don't run into them every day. If you don't know about Ethiopians, it's where some of the earliest church in Ethiopia was settled. There's a history with the Coptic church, and there was a Jewish community around up until fairly recently in this Ethiopian area. So it's a diverse thing. And part of why I wanted you to know about this eunuch is, look, you're not going to understand much of Christianity and miss the subtleties of it unless, as best as you can, you enter into the life of this person and what they have experienced and what are all the factors going on in this. Here's a castrated man who is an odd duck by any stretch of the imagination. Rich, probably intelligent, clearly an intellectual, scholarly man, riding out in the backwoods in a chariot, coming back from worship, and then this encounter with Philip. Now he's baptized. And what I want to say about that, and then I'm going to give it to you to give us, because your sermon on Sunday was absolutely fabulous. You nailed it again about what is the Christian faith in this. Folks, as you were listening to the information about the verdict here, the only Christian response to this that makes sense is to somehow, with every odd character in this, George Floyd popped into this world out of no place, this big, hulky black guy. And one of the things that I know people did early on wanted to know his story. And some people emphasized that he was in a Christian ministry singing group. I went and pulled that up one day and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And he was a part of a group that, and then others talked about his history of criminal things, and he had been charged with drugs and all of that stuff, and he had done some. And it was interesting to hear people want to demonize this guy. The truth is, he's not unlike this Ethiopian eunuch, right? Especially if you are a white person raised in a white culture. You know very little about the struggles and the history and the identity. And I've tried my whole life to understand black theology and the black culture. When I was in seminary in New York City, where I started at Union, I felt so fortunate back in the 80s to be able to get a hold of, I had a class on the history of black theology in our culture. So I read these great theologians like James Cone and Du Bois and all of these, and my eyes were so open. Average white guy from a small town, Minnesota, now living in New York, studying black theology. It was like I couldn't get enough of it. And the only thing I began to realize is how ignorant I constantly was about everything that was of another culture and another world. And so I'm going to ask people on all levels, I think the Christian perspective connecting with this story is, please enter into the hearts and the minds of these different characters. I'm hoping we will get to be able to hear from this police officer found guilty, because I bet he's going to get up, and my guess would be there is huge contrition in his heart. I'm convinced of it. I do know this police officer over here, I know her life is altered forever. And if the shooting of this boy in Brooklyn Center was an accident. And it's going to be so easy to say, we want, justice, but there's still nothing but broken lives here, all around. And I do think the Christian perspective is St. Francis of Assisi. Seek so not much to be right, but to understand and to have compassion in all aspects of this. Okay, I've gone on for a long time.
It was good, though.
Thank you. What is your take on either the text or the trial?
Well, I'll start with the text. I love this story because it speaks very clearly about the inclusion of all people in God's vision for community. We talk often, I love to steal your words on this, of God's kingdom breaking open.
Yeah.
And that's what we see happening in Acts. And you have what we could rightly call like a sexual minority who normally wouldn't be very welcomed in a community. And here he is being included and being baptized. And this text it's very important to the LGBT community for that reason, because it shows that even this eunuch who's a castrated male, he is included. And God's love extends to him as well. And so that's just something that I always think of, is the radical love and inclusion of God in the early church, which is so important.
That's very good. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still processing the stuff from the trial. This is a tough one.
It is, and you feel it almost more than you can intellectualize it. The justice part of it, in which people are saying, thank God there's some justice now. Justice is this theme of mishpat in the Old Testament. I've always interpreted justice as specific commands on how we treat my neighbor, especially those most different from us. Specific commands: don't steal, don't belittle, don't hate. One of the things that's happening in this trial is the bigger, broader, mega theology, mega issue about the desire that we would somehow get to a new stage in which the hurdles, which are twice as big for the black community, and everybody in life has hurdles, but we know we have almost intentionally or unintentionally set up hurdles for the black community that are 3 times higher, is the way I would say. And what I'm hearing is, this is one small way of saying, let's try and bring those hurdles down that we have intentionally created to make it harder. Because if it's a race, if life is a race, and the person in the end who gets more of the stuff in this world, you're going to be competing with other people. That's the way our system is. Unfortunately, it's not a mistake that if white folks are in charge, they're gonna if there's no punishment, they're gonna make the hurdles higher for other people and some have been able to get over even the harder things, and that gives people another excuse to be able to say, well, they made it. Yeah, but injustice is set up where we have almost unconsciously set up a system in which we have such an advantage with all of this. And the hope is, when people talk about justice in this, I think it's a way of trying to say, can we at least acknowledge that we have done this and try and do what we can to get the playing field more just or more available
leveled
for more people. That's the language I've come to use.
Yeah, and that's an overwhelming theme in Scripture of, the lowly will be lifted up and the rich will go hungry. So that sounds really horrible if you are the person who's down here, or the person who's up here who's ending up losing for the leveling to happen. But it's an overwhelming word in Scripture. Jesus calls us to love and serve the least of these in our midst. And I think, as much as we want to hope for contrition for Chauvin, we want him to be transformed and be repentant and all those things. Who's the least of these in this situation? And I think that's going to be a really hard question. And I think, I personally think Jesus would side with the victim and not the oppressor, personally.
He would. I think that's clear in this kind of, but I think here when we're talking about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, I think these people become metaphors.
Yes.
And on some level, they're pawns in a bigger metaphor of a call for justice, and maybe sacrificially, both of these in this context. This is kind of a Christian theme of this. This is where Jesus becomes the scapegoat for a world of violence and injustice. There's no reason Jesus should be put to death. He has done absolutely nothing but teach people about love and compassion and a new way of seeing the world. And ideally, both of these two, if there's change in this world that happens now, that eyes are opened to the injustice of what happened to the death of this man and the metaphor that the police officer is, if more police officers start to have compassion in these contexts and not be afraid, he becomes also then a springboard into a new day of what is God's preferred kingdom for all of us.
Yes. And certainly redemption for everyone coming at some future time. That is, what we cling to, that all will be put right, whatever that means.
The language, that one of the battles of this conversation in our world today is somebody saying Black Lives Matter, and then somebody responds, yeah, that's true, but all lives matter. And the person who says all lives matter, I would say, stop it. This is their moment to recognize. This is a moment to say the hurdles of this world are not the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but all people have hurdles they have to get over, and that is true. Life doesn't make it easy for anybody. Our friend Lend out here, who's videotaping, he's got his own story of disabilities that we all have those kinds of things in our life, some worse than others. That's true. But unfortunately, the injustice is, again, we have set up systems where it's 10 times harder for this group to own a home and get an education and get out of the... That's one of the things I learned when I was in the south side of Chicago that finally dawned on me was a light bulb, is that is the kid in the south side of Chicago where I lived who's born into a horrible condition. The sociology of that makes the hurdle of their life to be successful and not end up in jail. Mm-hmm. It's the sociology of it that hurdle is 10 times higher, and to not recognize that you don't get to sit back and say, well, we all have the same playing field. It's just not true. So if the hope is that this story is just one more that begins to level the fields of this world. The problem is those who are in power don't want to give it up, right?
Yeah. Well, to go back to what you were talking about earlier about the Ethiopian eunuch and the different worldviews that we see in different people, like I said Sunday, I would urge all of us to listen before we judge and listen to the perspectives of people in the Black community and not take their words and just dismiss them as being untrue. We need to be good neighbors first by listening and believing what they say. And that's what I see happening the most. That's the most painful to me is someone will say, I've had this horrible experience with police, or I've had this horrible experience, shopping where someone tailed me the whole time. And we just say, oh, you're probably just making that up, or you probably deserved it. And we can't afford to be dismissive of other people's worldviews and narratives. Just imagining if that's what Philip did and said, oh, you're just, an African guy, like, why would I baptize you? Then that's where the church dies. It doesn't grow into the whole nations. If we don't include people of diversity, that's our future is only death.
That's right. Well, our hearts are heavy in this world right now. We have COVID numbers going up. And I got to say, I'm growing more intolerant of, and I don't know where to go with this. How about the same thing? I'm growing more intolerant of the themes of, well, it's still fake news. There's no real virus out there, blah, blah, blah. And then I see my good friends that I know who have died and their family trying to come to grips with, a friend of mine in North Branch who no reason he should have died, but got it, and he was and it got dealt. And then I hear people saying, well, I don't need to get a shot and all that stuff. Years ago when I was a kid, we all got polio shots. It was standard, and there was nobody saying, oh, that's fake nonsense. We just did it because we knew it. We trusted the voices of those who I read today Ted Nugent, the redneck Ted Nugent. You know who he is? Maybe you don't know.
Yeah, I know.
He was a guitar player, and you shake your head at some of the things he says. He was this is all a lie. And then he got COVID, and he was doggone near death. And he tells a story about, I was down for the count. I didn't think I was going to come out of it. You'd think I would hope he would be an example of folks saying, it coming back to bite them. Because we all want to get back to normal lives, and we all want to get to the next new right stage of our life, and we can't do it until there's herd immunity, which means go get a shot and add to the healing of our nation and our world, rather than choose stubbornness and say, I don't need that. Well, I hope we haven't offended too many people today. Do you think we did? I hope not.
It's hard to say.
Hard to say. Keep praying for a nonviolent world. Keep praying, I think, for understanding, insight, and compassion. We'll see you on Sunday here at Glen Cary. It's been fun to see folks come out and have our numbers start to return, even if we're still wearing masks and things are still uncertain. If you can't come in for worship, you can catch the worship service on our Facebook page. Be posted Saturday night sometime. Blessings to our nation, our world.